think so. Blair Crisp had dismantled his rifle and put it back in the case, then left the room and made his way to a house on the other side of the square. He was expected, and the door opened immediately he knocked. He was greeted by an elderly lady, the owner of the property. "Hello, Mr. Ormerod. Your room is ready for you if you'd like to come this way." She led him up 3 flights of stairs, stopping at the top to get her breath back, then took him into an attic room. "Sorry, Mr. Ormerod, this was the only room I had left." Blair Crisp looked out of the window at the podium across the street, then turned and gave her a big smile. "This'll be great. Thank you very much." Crisp waited until the old lady left the room, then locked the door before returning to his case and assembling the rifle again. Wilson Small and company, who were sitting at the barbecue at the Devil's Cafe, could hear the sound of police blues and twos from a police vehicle as it tried to make its way up the street from the town square towards the cafe. The driver of the police vehicle had strict instructions to get Wilson Small to the town square, as the ceremony couldn't be held without him. The nearer the vehicle got to the Devil's Cafe, the more shouts could be heard from people in the street who were desperately trying to cooperate and get out of the way. Unfortunately, the press from the crowd at the back, pushing forward to get to see their heroes in the square, was making it nearly impossible for them to get out of the way. People from the main street started to spill into the lane leading to the Devil's Cafe, and by the time the vehicle reached Wilson, the cafe was surrounded by angry people who'd lost their place in the crush to get to the square. The crowd were not pleased, and there were shouts of abuse directed at Wilson and his company as they were bundled into the back of the vehicle. Then it started all over again, this time in reverse, as the police vehicle tried to get back to the square. It was slow going for the vehicle as it nudged forward, but eventually they got to the square, where the occupants of the vehicle were led to the VIP seats on the dais. There was a thin line of police and traffic wardens gripping the barriers around the square as the crowd pressed forward, threatening to push the barriers to the ground. Excitement and tension was beginning to mount, and there was sporadic cheering as celebrities were recognised as they made their ways to the seats at the back of the dais. Lucas O'Donnell, the master of ceremonies for the event, could be seen greeting the celebs as they arrived on stage, with the biggest cheer of the day, which was absolutely deafening, given as O'Donnell gave a loving kiss to Elegance Evers when she arrived. Blair Crisp had his rifle's telescopic sights directed at Wilson Small as he was led to his seat among the other VIPs already assembled. He drew a bead on Wilson's head, following him along the line as he was led to his seat. The crosshairs of the sight centered on Wilson's temple as he was escorted along the line, then re-centered on Wilson's forehead when he sat down. Crisp nodded to himself, satisfied that conditions were perfect for the shot. They couldn't have been better conditions had he manipulated them himself. He rested the rifle and stood up to stretch his back muscles. He could feel a tightness between his shoulder blades. He bent over and touched his toes, then stood up straight and put his arms out wide. Crisp turned to his left and right several times with arms outstretched and could feel the tenseness subsiding. He needed to be totally calm and relaxed when he took the shot. He could not afford to miss. Satisfied with his exercises, Blair Crisp took a bottle of water from his case and took a long drink, before replacing the bottle in the case. He moved over to the window and looked out. He had the television on and was only half listening to the commentary from Lucas O'Donnell. He had no interest in what O'Donnell had to say. He was waiting for the mayoress's speech, waiting for the trigger phrase. The windows to the attic room, which had been allocated to Blair Crisp, were actually French doors which led out onto a small balcony. The French doors had been opened up completely by Blair, and there was nothing in the way of a clear shot to the stage where the naming ceremony was due to take place. Blair had set up a table towards the back of the room. He had no wish to let anyone from any vantage point see him shooting a rifle. The rifle was resting, supported with a tripod stand, with the butt on the table and the barrel raised towards the ceiling. O'Donnell was still talking as Chris settled himself down behind his rifle, settling the butt tightly into his shoulder and easing his muscles to accommodate the familiar weapon. He looked through the telescopic sights, looking and aiming at each person in turn. Wilson Small's forehead loomed large in the crosshairs, and he moved on to the man beside him, startled when the man appeared to look straight back at him, as if he could see him. A bead of sweat ran down his face at the thought. Impossible. He knew he couldn't be seen. He stood up and lifted a towel to dry his face, then looked through the sights again, relieved to see the man chatting to Wilson. He smiled to himself and shook his head. Of course, nobody could see him.